Hello fellow woodworkers and welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop. This week we're going to be... Roll the intro. So the first stage in this project was to take everything apart and dismantle it, which took a little bit longer than I wanted. When I got the dust hood off as well, I was surprised at how much dust had managed to accumulate in and around the Mitre, even though I clean it regularly. So I took a slow and methodical approach to just taking everything apart, getting everything nice and clean as I went, because I think that was a really important way to move forward. Okay, so this is the work station. It was actually one of the very first projects I ever did way before I had a YouTube channel, and as you can see, there's a little dust drawer at the back, which when I cut this bit out to fit the mitre saw in, I sort of did it all a bit the wrong way round really, because none of this sort of really worked out as I thought it was going to be. The drawer, which has a gap at the front, is massive and is there to collect dust at the back, which it does, but if you look at the drawer when it's closed, you can see there's quite a big gap, and what I wanted the drawer to do was to sit at the back under here, but it didn't work out that way, unfortunately. And when I cut this piece of wood, I'd cut it out really before I'd seated the mitre saw, which was another mistake I made. One of the other mistakes is the bolts that you can see in there. When I attached them on the bottom, they were quite long. The bolts were sort of this long and needed to be shorter, so I used an angle grinder. It's before I had a lot of the tools I've got, so I used an angle grinder and ground them out, but now it's left a really rough thread, so getting them off is going to be quite difficult. So the next thing to do is clear the trolley unit that's underneath. This trolley unit has just got tools in it, like so. Some of my larger tools are in there, so I'm going to tidy all this out and then pull the actual unit out and then start taking it apart. And what I'm going to replace this piece of plywood with is this leftover part of the worktop from the recycled kitchen wood that I've got. The other thing is I need to raise this up. It's quite hard to see, I think, but this won't turn. It's sort of pretty wedged. You have to really force it to turn it to get an angle, because I didn't put anything in between this and the wood. So I'm going to put a piece of plywood in there, which means I'm going to have to drop this down, otherwise it's not going to match with my mitre saw station. And the other thing I might put a little bit of wood under that when I've done it, just to keep it nice and level, because as you can see there is quite a bit of a gap at the moment between where I can use my marker and the actual mitre saw. Apologies if you can hear the chickens in the background, by the way. They know I'm out here and they want to get involved. They'd love to have their own YouTube channel, I'm sure. So I'd like to firm that up, and maybe what I might do is actually put this bit of wood higher and move the whole thing just slightly forward, which I can do, but it would mean that I have to move this whole unit forward and that whole unit forward, which to be honest isn't the end of the world. Be quiet, Taurus. So let's get on with that now. I knew from the outset of the project that this drawer that I'm taking off now was going to be a complete and utter pain in the backside, and that's exactly as it turned out to be. It was one of the first things I ever made, as you'll have heard me say, this unit, and the drawer, I just did it really badly. I improved it the second time in putting it back in this way. You'll see at the end, but you know, it was a first project, so I can't be too hard on myself. When I deconstructed it, I then took the nuts off. This I thought was going to be really, really hard, but it was actually surprisingly easy. They just, with a spanner on them, they got straight through the little sort of nub of end of the metal. So when the unit was off, final clean up, even though at this stage it didn't really need it, and then I laid it over, ready to start taking it all apart. There were quite a few pieces of plywood involved in this. So once I'd taken the shelf off and I sort of stripped it back to how it should be, it's a sort of original form, I could then begin the process of deconstructing it. With that done, the next thing was to mark up the new top. As you can see, there's a slight bow in this. It's nothing major, and I can live with it. And it's certainly a lot less bow than the last one. And I took quite a long time here making sure these measurements were exactly right and exactly straight. I even got out my big long steel ruler, which doesn't get used very often. And I used a mechanical pencil for this, not a normal sort of carpenter's pencil, because I wanted to get a very, very thin line in order for me to do an accurate cut when I put the track saw on it. So when I was happy that the line was straight and it measured right and it was straight from the top and the bottom using the square, I then went on to use the plunge saw. This is my Parkside plunge saw. I'm not going to mention it again, but I love this saw. Ran it through. I got a really, really clean cut. It doesn't look clean outside, but it was very, very clean. And then I just offered it up. At first I thought there was a little bit of a gap, and there was at the back, which I was going to pack with some wood, but to be honest, I'm not really sure it needs it. Then, of course, being a garage workshop, it has a pocket hole video. Really sorry about the out of focus here. I think I've told you before, I'm using a new digital SLR, and for some reason the autofocus just keeps disappearing. But this is the piece of wood which is going underneath the new work surface that's going on the top. So it needed some pocket holes to strengthen it and make sure that when it was underneath, it was attached really cleanly to the sides. When I did this originally, I don't even think I used pocket holes. But when that was all nice and sorted, I then went back on and I put it under the existing drawer slides. I did move the drawer slides, you'll see that later in the video, but I wanted to get it as close as I possibly could. And I decided to leave a little gap at the front and a little gap at the other side, just to make sure that I could lean the drawer back, or take the drawer back a little bit. Because if you remember earlier on when you saw it, the drawer was off. So I took off the little battens. I ended up reusing those. And there's the unit cut there, as you can see. When I took the battens off, I then carefully removed the pocket hole screws on both sides. Not so easy on that side. They're a bit sort of pushed in. And then I offered up the panel underneath just to make sure that it would fit. And it was actually a really, really good fit. I was pleased and surprised at how well it fitted. The next stage was obviously to fix this in, which I did. And I actually, on this, I used a collection of screws that I had lying around. Most of them were sort of brass, but I'm running a bit low on screws, so I just wanted to make sure that I had some that weren't too long, because obviously I didn't want them to go all the way through and pierce the surface on the bottom. With that done, the next stage was actually to right the unit, and then you can see the shelf is nice and level, and then offer up the new top. I was really pleased it was completely level. I didn't have to adjust the feet or anything, and the new top was a really, really nice fit, as you can see there. It fitted on perfectly. So with that done, I know there's a little gap at the back, and that is intentional. That's not bad measuring. With that done, I then went to fix the top. I started fixing this from underneath, but actually it was really, really tiring on my arm, and I thought, blimey, I'm not going to be able to do this all the way through. So then I took the next step and I just flipped the entire unit up, which by this point it weighs a ton, and then I just put all the fixings in from the bottom. I then slid the station into place when I've moved the cable, and I was really pleased with how it fitted, and the height looked really nice, and again it was completely level. What I did here though, you'll see, is a little bit of a shenanigans with bashing and tapping the other units. There was a little bit more movement in there than I wanted, so I pushed all the other units and sort of gently squidged them and eased them. They're not very easy to move because obviously they're all full of stuff and they're very heavy, but I wanted to get it level. And then I offered up the mitre saw, and I was very pleased that the handle turned at the front so I could rotate the saw without having to put an extra piece of plywood in, which is what I'd originally planned to do. So when I'd got that all nice and level and I'd put back my mitre saw rail, it was time for the next stage, which was to drill the holes. This took a little bit longer than I thought. I first of all had to drill a little pilot hole and then use this really, really big, I think it's actually a masonry drill, to get them through. I then slipped the bolts through and the nuts from the top and secured all of those in place to make it nice and sturdy, which it was. It was very sturdy. I actually had to go out and buy other bolts, and what I did do that you can't see, I did it off camera, I ended up buying bolts that were 120 M6 by 120, and I cut them all down just because they were far too long and it was going to stop the drawer closing, but they needed to be long enough because obviously they're going through the thick piece of worktop and through that plywood, which is the sort of support. So when I drilled all the holes and I put all of the bolts through, I secured the nuts on the bottom, and the mitre station was not going anywhere. It's really, really well connected. I used a mixture of my impact driver and a spanner to attach them all to the bottom as well. Firstly, shout out to me for actually getting in that gap, but the next thing to do was to lower the rails. As you can see, obviously the rails are too high, sorry, so I had to lower them, and I did this quite simply. I just used a block of wood at the side to get the right measurements and marked them, so I pre-marked them, and then I just drilled and screwed them in. And this was the very satisfying moment where I got to offer the drawer up, fingers crossed that it fitted, and after what felt like an inordinate amount of time to try and get those rails in the right place, I pushed the drawer, and after a bit of pushing and shoving, where it wasn't quite on the rails, it went in perfectly. And as you can see, there is still a gap, I'm not denying that, but the drawer is a lot more level and the gap is a lot smaller than it was previously. So very pleased with how that turned out. I knew that drawer was going to be a pain in the backside to start with, but I was just pleased it turned out. And then I rolled the tray back. The only thing left to put back in is the shelf, and I'm actually going to upgrade that shelf. So, thanks very much for watching the video. As you can see, this is the end of stage 1 of this project. This project's actually in 2 parts. Next week in part 2, I'm going to create the hood, the dust hood, that sits over the top of the mitre saw. Thank you so much for watching. If this is your first visit to the Garage Workshop, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell and take a look over some of my old videos. If you watch every week, thank you so much for all of your support. Don't forget to comment and leave a like. Hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll catch you in part 2. Happy woodworking.